Welcome to the Three Martini Lunch. Grab a stool next to Greg Columbus of Radio America and Jim Garrity of National Review. Three Martinis coming up.
So glad you're with us for the Wednesday edition of the Three Martini Lunch. Jim Garrity is away. In his place today, Andy McCarthy, former Chief Assistant U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of New York. He's also a contributing editor and columnist at National Review Online. He is a Fox News contributor. In fact, he was just on Fox this morning. And he's also the author of many books, including Ball of Collusion. Andy, great to have you with us again.
Greg, great to be with you.
Well, a lot to talk about today, many different legal issues. The tables have turned on New York Attorney General Tish James. In fact, the fabulous New York Post headline this morning, "A Tish Best Served Cold." And you'll find out why that's an appropriate headline today. We'll also take a look at a verdict across the pond in the UK, which just a few years ago would have been very common sense, and you'd be wondering why the case was even brought. But apparently the UK has decided there's only two sexes. So we'll look at that. And we'll also take a look at the curious and also innovative way that another rabble-rouser on the campus of Columbia University, who is not a United States citizen, was taken into custody this week. But you know where you're not going to find massive anti-Semitic protests? Hillsdale College. Just talked about him yesterday. I'm a Hillsdale grad, proudly, degree in history. But, you know, another thing they focus on a lot over there is economics. And Andy and I just talked yesterday about the lousy economics of the environmental left, telling you you're going to save all this money if you retrofit your house with all the green stuff. That's not true. And they're also stifling the free market, like we said. My very first class was economics class. You learn about choice and opportunity cost and sunk costs and all these things that just the very basic principles of economics, which so many people never get, whether it's in their formative years or at college. But you're going to get that at Hillsdale College. And the difference for you is that you can get it for free. Hillsdale's recently launched a new course, Understanding Capitalism. You'll learn the role of profit and loss, how human nature plays a role in our economic system, boy does it ever, why capitalism depends on private property rights, the rule of law, and above all, freedom, and why capitalism is ultimately a system that encourages morality rather than undermines it, as you'll hear on so many other campuses. So go right now to hillsdale.edu/martini to enroll in this course, Understanding Capitalism. There's no cost, and it's easy to get started. That's hillsdale.edu/martini to enroll for free. All right, Andy, as promised, we're going to take a closer look at another person responsible for stirring up anti-Israel protests and to some extent pro-Hamas protests on the campus of Columbia University in the spring of 2024. And that's a guy named Mohsen Mahdawi. He has worked with Mahmoud Khalil, who we talked about the other day, and has been taken into custody and approved for deportation, at least as far as the immigration judge is concerned. Well, Mohsen Mahdawi has also been applying for citizenship as recently as last year, and he was headed to the immigration office in Vermont earlier this week in order to begin the final process of becoming a U.S. citizen. But it turns out the invitation wasn't exactly what he thought it was, because he was taken into custody. And now, of course, a federal judge has put a restraining order on any sort of deportation until the process plays out. But Andy, here we go with another case. I'm thinking the conditions will be pretty similar to the ones with Khalil, but you also got to give a tip of the hat for ingenuity to the ICE agents here.
Yeah, as a New Yorker, Greg, I'm kind of reminded of, every now and then the NYPD rounds up fugitives by sending out notices that they've won the lottery, and then they show up to collect, and then the cops put bracelets on them, which I always thought was a kind of a neat touch. And, something similar is done here. In its way, it's almost eloquent because it, I think, highlights a distinction that the government is anxious to draw in these cases, which is that no matter how high up the ascending scale of connection to the United States an alien goes, he's still a guest in this country. He's not a citizen. And that distinction is crucial in these cases because unless we learn more information about this particular one that differentiates it in some way, not only from the Mahmoud Khalil case, but the cases of a number of other legal aliens, mainly students, but some academics, who the government is also trying to push out of the country for pro-Hamas activism and anti-Semitism. But a lot of these cases are based on activity that at least arguably would be constitutionally protected under the First Amendment if it were engaged in by an American citizen. This is an important line between citizenship and alienage, because no matter how high up you are on the chain of alien, and this is lawful permanent resident who's on the precipice of actually getting naturalized as a U.S. citizen, under the immigration laws, you can still be deported if the Secretary of State renders a reasonable judgment that your presence and activities in the United States are detrimental to American foreign policy. Secretary Rubio said he's signed about 300 of these, and he expects to sign more. So I don't think this is going away. And as we saw in Khalil's case, as much as people caterwauled about it, the fact is this is a very clear statute in the law. It's been in the law really since the Cold War era, since the mid-1950s, even though it rubs people the wrong way because we feel like if it's free speech, there shouldn't be any punishment for that, even if it's obnoxious. The fact is aliens are different from citizens. They're guests in this country. If they're going to engage in behavior that would have stopped us from letting them in the first place, they can be booted if the Secretary of State makes this judgment, and I expect it'll continue.
Yeah, I'm just looking at these stories, Andy, and we talked the other day about how the media will put in the total non sequitur of a centuries-old law or seldom-used law. I'm looking at things today like Mohsen Mahdawi, who's been in the United States for a decade, was taken away in handcuffs. Elsewhere in the CNN story, he was going to enroll in a master's program at Columbia University this fall. Irrelevant. But the media will come up with the most sympathetic ways to describe people that hate this country.
Yeah. If when I was a prosecutor, if we had broken into the New York Times without a warrant to steal all their neat stuff, I don't think they would have referred to the Fourth Amendment as a centuries-old law. I think they would have been clinging to it pretty heavily.
Yes, exactly. Unbelievable. But the slant still goes on when it comes to the mainstream media. No doubt about it. There is a growing expense eating into your company's profits. Pay attention to that. And you probably already know that it's your cloud computing bill. You may have already gotten a good deal to start, but now the spending on that is sky high and increasing every year. But what if you could cut your cloud bill in half and improve performance at the same time? Well, if you act by May 31st, Oracle Cloud Infrastructure can help you do just that. You can cut it in half by moving to OCI. This is for new U.S. customers with minimum commitment until May 31st. You can do that by visiting oracle.com/martini. These savings are real. On average, OCI costs 50% less for compute, 70% less for storage, and 80% less for networking. Join Modal, Skydance Animation, and today's innovative AI tech companies who upgraded to OCI and saved. Plus, OCI has 4 to 8 times the bandwidth of other clouds. It also offers one consistent price instead of variable regional pricing. The offer, again, ends May 31st, and it's only for U.S. customers with a minimum financial commitment. See if you qualify for half off at oracle.com/martini. That's oracle.com/martini. All right, on to another good martini, Andy. And for this, so we go across the pond to the UK for, like I said earlier, a decision that 10 to 15 years ago, people would have wondered why this was even in court. But now it's actually a major sigh of relief for a lot of people in England and elsewhere. Hats off to Hot Air for the story. The UK Supreme Court has ruled against all expectations that modern courts rarely get it right, that sex is binary. This case has been 7 years in the making, which in itself is absurd, says Hot Air. Even more bizarrely, this common sense decision was necessary to protect a DEI-based law that would require gender balancing in Scotland, meaning that this commonsensical decision was actually necessary to define just who sits where in the intersectional spectrum. In other words, answering the question, what is a woman, was necessary because of a spat over the spoils of progressive redistributionism. Still, it's pretty hard to get too churlish about the decision. It was the right one, totally necessary, and will protect women and girls from predatory, mentally ill, or fetishistic men, so I will take the win. Folks like the noted atheist Richard Dawkins, as well as Harry Potter author J.K. Rowling, celebrating the victory. They've been odd allies in this whole thing over time. Andy, it's just mind-boggling that we've gotten here, but it appears over the last several months here, maybe the elections had a big part of this, and the whole sports situation where been one of those 80-20 issues, that either the momentum is strongly in the right direction here, or maybe common sense is on the verge of a win, but I'm a little bit hesitant to be that optimistic.
Yeah, you don't want to be that optimistic. I mean, we could always hope that tomorrow the British courts decide the sky is blue. That would be fascinating and revolutionary. But I think that you can only go on so long living a lie. I mean, you can only go on so long having to tiptoe around the truth, because it either hurts somebody's feelings or people who are in power are offended by it or what have you. And we've gone on for a very, very long time that way. It's weird to me. I have to say, I'm always I'm grateful, and I don't want to put academics down, because I have a lot of affection for a number of academics in my life. And I certainly don't want to put journalists down. That's where I spent the last 25 years of my life. But I'm kind of grateful that I grew up in not just in law enforcement, but in trial litigation, because the thing that you learn in that arena is that rather than having important things in our society decided by panels of experts, what we do is we take 12 people from the community and we put them in the jury box, and they get to decide the important stuff. And if you have things that are out of their ken, we can bring in expert witnesses and try to get them up to speed with the knowledge that they need to decide whatever the disputed issue is. But it's the common sense of the community that rules in the courtroom. And what you learn very quickly, especially as a prosecutor, because the prosecutor's job is to convince them. The defense lawyer's job is always to try to knock the case down. The prosecutor's job is to build it and try to present them with, we call it a narrative, but what we would like to think is that it's the truth that is presented to them in a compelling enough way to convince them. And what I've always found, Greg, is that jurors want to know reality. They want to know why something happened and exactly what happened. And if you present people whose consciousness has been raised that they have to decide things based only on the evidence that they see, on reality, if you try to present them bromides, anthems, ideology, outer worldly stuff, those are the cases that get laughed out of court. And I just think that for me, that experience and maybe that environment was a sanctuary compared to what we have in the great out there, where people seem to be very inclined to live under fictions. But I think if you let that go on for too long, you can have a one-off here and a one-off there. If you let it go on for too long, it's very harmful. It's not just like generally harmful to the society, although there's plenty of that, but there's a lot of, flesh and blood people who get hurt by this stuff all along the way.
Yeah, I assume this will kind of be like the Biden cognitive decline, where if in fact, this trend continues and people kind of slink away from the idea that biological men can play women's sports and they should have access to the bathrooms, and we kind of move away from that, it's going to be just like the media post Biden saying, "Oh, what? Oh, no. We were the ones who were duped by this. We weren't carrying this water. I don't know what you're talking about. We were never on board with all this."
Yeah, the culprits are now want to be the heroes. Yes, it's amazing.
Exactly right. So, yes, sanity prevails, at least temporarily, in the UK. They got a lot of other problems over there, but looks like they got this one right, thankfully. All right, today's podcast is also sponsored by BetterHelp. And look, this is the time to figure out whether you need some help achieving your goals for 2025. We're almost 4 months into the year. How are things looking? Are you on the track to get where you want to be by the end of the year? Or are there still hurdles that you just can't get past? Could be professional, could be personal, could be relationships, whatever it is. Maybe it's time to get some more help. And that's where BetterHelp comes in. And in addition to providing quality therapy, they can also save you a lot of money. Traditional in-person therapy can cost anywhere from $100 to $250 per session, which adds up very quickly. But with BetterHelp Online Therapy, you can save on average of up to 50% per session. Plus, with BetterHelp, you pay a flat fee for weekly sessions, which saves you big on cost and on time. Plus, with more than 30,000 therapists, BetterHelp is the world's largest online therapy platform, having served more than 5 million people globally. It's also really convenient, too. You can join a session with the click of a button, helping you fit therapy into your busy schedule. Plus, you can switch therapists at any time. Your well-being is worth it. Visit BetterHelp.com/3ML to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/3ML. All right, Andy, on to our third martini. There's definitely some good here. There's definitely a lot of crazy here. But of course, the last time people were paying a lot of attention to New York State Attorney General Letitia James, it's when she was leading the prosecution against then former President Donald Trump on very dubious financial charges, which she got a conviction on, mind you. But of course, the appeals process is still going on. But now the tables seem to have turned a little bit, and Letitia James could be in a significant amount of legal trouble. New York Post with the story, but this is all over the place. New York Attorney General Letitia James, who infamously declared that, quote, no one is above the law, unquote, when she was targeting Donald Trump, was hit with a federal criminal referral for instances of alleged mortgage fraud on Tuesday. The Federal Housing Finance Agency director, that's a federal position, obviously, the guy's name is William Pulte, sent a message to Attorney General Pam Bondi and Deputy Attorney General Todd Blanche, alleging that James had falsified records to get home loans for a property in Virginia that she claimed was her principal residence in 2023, while still serving as New York's top prosecutor. That's a problem, as we'll explain in a moment. That all occurred in late August 2023, weeks before James began her civil fraud trial against the Trump Organization for allegedly overinflating the values of many of his properties, and ended in a $454 million judgment. The letter from Pulte says, quote, Ms. James was the sitting Attorney General of New York and is required by law to have her primary residence in the state of New York, even though her mortgage applications list her intent to have the Norfolk, Virginia property as her primary home. It appears Ms. James' property and mortgage-related misrepresentations may have continued to her recent 2023 Norfolk, Virginia property purchase in order to secure a lower interest rate and more favorable loan terms. As they say on the infomercial, Andy, but wait, there's more. In February 2001, James also purchased a 5-family dwelling in Brooklyn, but has consistently misrepresented the same property as only having 4 units in both building permit applications and numerous mortgage documents and applications. That is significant because under federal lending standards, 5-unit buildings are classified as commercial properties and subject to stricter underwriting requirements, including higher down payments, different debt service coverage ratios, and less favorable loan terms. But we're not done yet. Oh, no, there's at least one more. Pulte attached several documents also showing that James purchased another property with her father as a co-signer, but falsely listed the pair as husband and wife in 1983 and 2000. A lot of different twists and turns here. Andy, what do you make of it?
Well, my mom is so happy about this story, I have to tell you, Greg, because I actually got to say this on television today. One of my dad's favorite expressions was, people who live in glass houses shouldn't throw wild parties. I actually got to use that today in connection with the Attorney General of the Empire State. It's, you know, if you're going to go after somebody like Donald Trump, which she did, I have to say, her having very closely followed all of the lawfare stuff, she is in a tight competition with Alvin Bragg for which was the most preposterous case that was brought against Trump. And she may have edged him out because even though that other one had that, we had the porn star and, no, the jury didn't have to agree on the crime because nobody could figure out what the crime was. And that didn't matter. It was just the defendant was Trump and it was Manhattan. So he was, going down. Right. But here they took a consumer finance or a consumer protection statute that is really monstrous if it's not, it may even be monstrous as applied, because why you need the government to get involved in this when you have prosecutors who can always prosecute fraud, I don't know. But the idea was that it's almost like a class action sort of thing in the sense that if you have somebody who commits a massive fraud against consumers, they all lose a couple of bucks here or there, but it's not worth it to any single one of them to bring a lawsuit, right, against the fraud, because lawsuits are very expensive. So the legislature's idea was, well, let's let the attorney general bring that lawsuit. But the idea was to protect consumers. And she took that statute and she applied it to the very different situation where you have sophisticated financial actors on both sides of a transaction, and their business is to assess risk. And they all have their eyes open about what they're doing, so they hardly need the protection of New York State. Does anybody really think that, like, J.P. Morgan Chase needs help from New York State to figure out what an interest rate should be? I mean, it's preposterous, right? But that was what she brought the fraud case on the basis of. And even if it were true that Trump was exaggerating his assets, there was a disclosure in the disclosure statements or an admonition in the disclosure statements that said, do your own due diligence. And in this kind of atmosphere, you know, with these kinds of players, they do their own due diligence, whether they get told to or not. And nobody lost money, and everybody wanted to keep in business with Trump because they all made money. So it was a preposterous case. And yet she and the elected progressive Democrat in a robe, Arthur Engoron, he was the goofy judge on the case, they concocted this fraud theory that was based on interest rates. And imagine that the state of New York, the public, had somehow been bilked out of $454 million when the people who were actually in the transactions all made money. So, I mean, it was a crazy case. But if you're going to do something like that, it's always a problem when prosecutors get creative, because the way the law is supposed to work. If you're going to enforce a statute against somebody, the statute has to be clear enough that the average person, that is a person of average intelligence, can understand what the law prohibits and conform their behavior in that way. What you find is that prosecutors, who can be very creative people, like to take words and stretch them for as far as they can go, and some would say stretch them beyond the meaning of the statute and apply them in very creative ways. If you're going to engage in that kind of thing and you're somebody like Tish James, you have to make sure that that your own house is clean. Pardon the pun, given the facts of what we're dealing with here. But, you know, it's just mind-boggling to me in terms of arrogance. And again, these are all allegations. We don't know if she's guilty or she's not guilty. But you know, the fact that she would bring the kind of action against Trump if she had this other stuff going on in her own life, and she knows she's dealing with somebody like Trump who's extremely vindictive. That's not my assessment. Trump would tell you he's your retribution, right? Except I think he's his own retribution. You know, this is a guy who's been on the public stage for decades. Everybody knows who he is, and James prosecuted him, so she knows better than most people who he is. If you're going to go after this guy, you better make sure that your own flank is covered. And it looks like she didn't. And I guess I'll just conclude by saying this convinces me, as somebody who covered lawfare very extensively for a number of years, really going back before even the stuff that started against Trump, I would just say that people who are in law enforcement should do law enforcement. If you're in law enforcement and you're doing politics, you're going to take your eye off the law enforcement ball. This is exactly the kind of mistake that people make when they're playing politics with something that you need to keep politics out of. And I think she's going to end up probably getting burned by it.
So true. Yeah. Not only is her house not in order, it's apparently not even in New York. So that's
right.
Major problem. Andy, always great to be with you. Thanks for subbing for Jim the last few days, and we'll see you down the road.
It's my pleasure, Greg. Thanks so much.
Thank you, sir. Andy McCarthy, former Chief Assistant U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of New York, columnist and contributing editor at National Review Online. He's also a Fox News contributor and an accomplished author, including Ball of Collusion. Thank you for listening to the Three Martini Lunch today. Please subscribe to the podcast. If you haven't already, tell your friends about us as well. Thanks also for your 5-star ratings and your kind reviews. Please keep those coming. Get us on your home devices. All you have to say is play Three Martini Lunch podcast. Follow all of us on X. Andy is at Andrew C. McCarthy. Jim is at Jim Garrity. I'm at Greg Corombos. Have a terrific Wednesday. Join us again Thursday for the next Three Martini Lunch.